Welcome to What's Left, the weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-hosts, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson, and community organizer and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We are online at what-s-left.webnode.com. Please subscribe, rate, review, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. And jot down our contact information in case we get shut down one day. Well, today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to have our roles reversed. That being myself and Andy and Kenny's roles. We'll be interviewed, we'll be asked questions, we'll be interrogated possibly by Jake and Rob. To sort of get our opinion, our positions, our points of view on some of the topics that they have prepared so that they could ask us what we think about certain positions like guns and the Constitution and the government in general and the system. So I'm looking forward to that, and we'll see what they have to share with us. Do you want to introduce yourselves, Rob and Jake?
Okay. I'm Rob Doyle. I reside outside of Pittsburgh, PA, in Steubenville, Ohio, which is about 30 miles to the west, rather, of Pittsburgh. And I am in banking as a profession, and I'm looking forward to this conversation because it's timely with all the new things that President Biden's rolling out to see how other people from the left point of view have their points of view on some of these topics. So I'm looking forward to this conversation for sure.
Hi, I'm Jake. I am an individualist and I believe in liberty and freedom. I am a former Bernie voter and a former Trump voter. I don't necessarily affiliate myself with either of the mainstream parties, and here to have this discussion with you guys about these topics.
And we should say, last time we had, we'll do a puzzle piece, so we'll move it this way around. Last time, Rob and Jake, we asked you both as Trump voters in a previous episode that we'll link on the description box below about your positions and your opinions and what did you make of all of just Trump and attacks against Trump, and also the perception that there is about you in the public. So anyone can find that in the description box below.
And I think the idea was that this could be part of maybe an ongoing series of initially interviews of each other, and then really potentially more almost debates that could go on around issues that come up over the course of time. So between what is historically called the left and people who might identify themselves closer on the right, to see if there's a discussion that could be engaged there.
All right. I guess we'll give you all the reins to go.
All right. All right. Well, what we're going to do today is this evening is to walk through a series of kind of big picture topics and then specific questions within those topics. And hopefully it'll give ourselves, Jake and I, as well as anyone else who's viewing this, who may be on the right, because if you're not looking for all points of view, you're just hearing the choir. So you got to listen to other people. You got to have this discourse and conversation. And you know, maybe you're not changing hearts and minds, but you're getting people to think. And I think that's the important thing that we're trying to do here. You know, I think there's a lot more common ground between the people in this room than there might be in the country. So we'll kick it off. The first type of topic here will be the Constitution. And if you've read the thing that I sent over, it kind of sets up each question or topic a little bit. But, you know, we always hear, you know, Pelosi and the different talking heads, Schumer, name the person, doesn't matter who it is, on the television or in print. You know, we need to eliminate the Electoral College. We need term limits on the Supreme Court. We want to remove the Second Amendment or do everything we can. And they rattle those swords, but and this is my point of view, a little editorial there, but they know they can change it if they want to. The Constitution is brilliant in one way. The founders knew that today is what we're doing. We don't know what will happen 100, 500, 1,000 years from now. So they know they can change it with 2/3 vote of Congress and 3/4 of the states. And the dirty secret is you don't need Congress to get an amendment moving forward. The states can pass it at a 2/3 level amongst themselves and then put it out for a 3/4 vote by the states. So the question is, if the left really knows that they can do those things to change the Constitution, why do they just yield to rhetoric? And they know they're powerless to change the Electoral College unless an amendment's passed, or term limits, even for Congress or Senate. Any of the things that the Constitution doesn't spell out, you need to change it with an amendment. Why does the left not just go down that road? Annie?
Yeah. And I think I asked Rob about this in terms of what kind of answers, and I'm going to answer for myself as a socialist person.
That's what we want. We want your position, not the talking heads.
So the first thing to say is that our democracy that we have in the United States, and we live under a system called capitalism, and Marx described capitalism this way, and I believe it is accurate to describe it this way: as capitalism is the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, the dictatorship of the capitalist class. And Nancy Pelosi and those characters in the Democratic Party and Republican Party really represent actors of a state, actors in a state that's a dictatorial state, a state that is has as much to do with democracy and equality as the Communist Party in China has to do with Marxism. And this is the democracy we live in didn't just become a dictatorship since Trump or since Obama or since Clinton. It has really been a dictatorship of the capitalist class since its inception back in the time of the American Revolution. That revolution was not there for regular people. While it was fought by regular people, it was really there to establish the property rights of a new emerging class, getting rid of the king and things like that, but establishing really the new merchant class and the set of landowners who would be able to rule ultimately collectively to establish modern capitalism under the American Revolution here, the French Revolution across the way. And so the things of the Constitution were never about rights for regular people. In fact, the first thing that was passed after the American Revolution was the Articles of the Confederacy. And even that document wasn't really about working people, but that document was not nearly controlling enough. It gave too much power to regular people, and you had rebellions where people were not allowing themselves to be taxed and were essentially, like the Shays Rebellion, threatening the existing government as it existed. So the Constitution itself was established almost as a counter-revolutionary document to quell in the liberties that the people who fought the American Revolution thought they had, but never were supposed to attain. That is, the rights to actually live free. And so the Constitution really was about establishing the right of property and property owners to control things and establishing a centralized government that could centralize taxation, centralize the creation of a military, ultimately a police force that would then be used to make sure that property ownership was maintained and expanded. So that would be my answer, is like, I don't think there's any reason to try to move around Electoral College, all that kind of stuff. This is moving around deck chairs on the Titanic. There's nothing democratic about our democracy. It is a shell to hide what is really ruled by the capitalists in this country. And so I'm not really interested in like any of those changes because I don't think it's going to actually lead to our liberation.
Can I follow up with that?
Let's go. I would say that we should let people just kind of answer and then see if we go to the next. So maybe do Eduardo and Kenny. And then I think you guys had a follow-up question on there. Maybe you can go.
There's one, and we'll get to that. I think it'll build on what you just said, Anne.
So yeah, I mean, I believe, I think similarly to Lipson. I think that's why I lean on Marxism. In terms of eliminating this idealized conception of the past, of history, that's how it's sold to us. Founding fathers, the national anthem, all this indoctrination into waving flags for certain countries. I don't think that's different in other countries. You know, that those revolutions by the bourgeoisie of Guatemala, the country I was born, that was not for the common people either. The Mexican, revolution against the Spanish, that was the establishment of the new ruling class, the capitalist class that was emerging in those countries too. So it's not unique to the U.S. And these other countries also adopted this constitution as a model to model their constitutions, and again, to secure their power, and become the new ruling class of the people at the bottom, the actual producers of things, the people that the laborers and things like that.
Yeah, the only follow-up question is, they can call what is known as a constitutional convention and totally rewrite the entire constitution stem to stern if they wanted to, or if they can get the states and everybody to have constitutional convention. Is that something that, I know you guys are saying how the original constitution and how it's structured and how it's enforced is not necessarily in the best interest of all peoples as opposed to a ruling class. But if they could rewrite the whole thing, is that something that would appeal to not only the left or the right, but just to your points of view? If it could be totally rewritten, which it could be if they call convention.
I'll just say that as long as we're in this capitalist system, my point of view is that whether you rewrite it, or anytime you have any convention, if you're still not tackling the root of the issue, which is capitalism, which is, and I'm an anti-capitalist. I cannot say like Andy and Kenny that I'm a socialist, but if you have a system, there is nothing that you can do that's going to be anything that is really fundamentally radical for us to have the rights that we need as peoples under this system. So whatever convention there is, whether it be 2/3 or anything, it's just going around. You're working within a system. So it's just working a circle within a circle. You're not going to get anywhere, in my point of view. And so that's why I think that we have to not just rewrite the Constitution, we have to rewrite the entire system, so to speak, and begin anew, but under a non-capitalist system.
And I mean, at least for me too, like, the supposed, consistency of the American Constitution or the system is not by virtue of the document. It's by virtue of violence in the imperial aspects of this nation that has externalized the real cost of capitalism, that does it every day, that, and so to me, the conversation about the Constitution is about that economic system that, again, has consequences, has a cost, and that cost is not, paid by and large in this nation. It's paid externally in other nations. And that will lead us, I think, to other questions, later.
An example of this for me too is just that the Constitution, well, you're talking about like reforming it or changing it, but just the Constitution itself is just the separation of powers, right? One of the principles is to separate powers. If we look now just at the things that are happening right now, the co-conspirators, this is my point of view, for sure. If we look at how even Trump was impeached the last time, the Republican senators came out and said, way before the articles of impeachment came to the Senate, they said from the start, they said, we're going to do just as the White House or the Trump administration is, we're going to be aligned with him. This is before the impeachment articles were delivered to the Senate. And this is what Mitch McConnell was saying and stuff, right? So I just feel if there's truly separation of powers, right? This is why I'm saying it just serves as a way to really maintain a ruling class that's in place already, that's not going to be there to represent us. You're supposed to have a check and balances. And we clearly saw in the Trump administration, that's not, if the Senate's supposed to be the jurors and you were supposed to there judicially review, right, what were the charges against Trump, but you came out before. I mean, I don't think any jury out in the real world right here when we have, right, well, this is the real world, but, like coming out and saying, we've already made up our decision even before you hear the case. This is an example of the separation. There isn't no separation of powers. These people have, they're in collusion. That's the real collusion. It's not against Russia. I think that's the left's conspiracy. It's the collusion between the White House and the Congress, and being in cahoots. And here we are talking about the Constitution and the separation of powers. If we even rewrite one, I mean, we won't have anything as to the pure in its purest form, even if we rewrite one, because we still are under a capitalist system to uphold that power. But that's all. I'll stop there.
Can I make a comment? I'm a little bit confused because I'm trying to figure out how it is that a system of capitalism, which allows free exchange between individuals, and in this case also property rights, how this is somehow these issues that you have, right? Whether we're talking about violence to create the political structure in the first place, or the society, right? Violence, hierarchies, political corruption, economic corruption, or even authoritarianism. None of these things are exclusive to capitalism, right? If you have any other system, these things are still a potential to happen to that system, right? How is it that these things are exclusive to only capitalism? And I guess the thing I would say about the Constitution is that's what's so important about the Constitution, right? Is that these things can occur in any system, right? But the Constitution is there to protect individuals' rights. And I don't see the Constitution, when we're talking about things getting corrupted, it's getting corrupted on a bureaucratic level by politicians and special interests. The Constitution doesn't grant special privileges. The Constitution does not allow our individual rights to be violated. It does not grant rights. It protects our rights that were not granted by anyone, right? That we just have because we are humans and because we are individuals. So I see some sort of Constitution. Of course, maybe, we could come to some kind of new agreement on how we could potentially protect rights and how we could rewrite these things, which again, Rob was saying the Constitution allows for this, right? For us to debate and rationalize and figure out how this should sensibly be written out so that it best serves, achieves the goals that we want to as a society. But we need something that is there to protect the rights of individuals. So, in a system that wasn't capitalist, how would you go about protecting the rights of individuals?
Well, we're already moving into our discussion of socialism then, but what I'll basically say is, in the spirit of trying to stay in the area of like the topics of the day, the dictatorship of the capitalists is not the dictatorship of their state is established by the Constitution, which establishes their political state. Their economic control isn't talked about. You won't hear anything about profit making or the right to profits in the Constitution. It keeps it separate. So economic dictatorship of the capitalist class, right, is completely independent of the political system, which basically maintains that control by establishing a police force, right, that can make sure they keep their property, and a military that just in case allows them to keep their property and allows them to expand their property ownership and expand their grab of markets. That's what the Constitution is really about, and it's done its job magically. It hasn't done something wrong here, folks. It's done exactly what it was intended to do, which is establish the right of property owners to expand their control of property, and it's done it swimmingly. And it's led to this world that we have right now, where all these other capitalist classes in other countries seek to replicate these constitutions because they know it allows them to hide behind this democratic shell the face of democratic or a capitalist dictatorship.
So are you saying that the concentration of power and the corruption of our politics and our economy can only exist and only occur within a capitalist system?
No, it occurred under feudalism as well. It occurred under the slave system and the Romans and Greeks as well. You won't see it under primitive communism, under hunters and gatherers. But apparently, the minute we started agriculture, humans became incapable of doing anything other than having a minority rule and a majority be ruled over. This won't be solved until the majority rule themselves in common association. That's what a socialist revolution is. It's not the Communist Party taking over. But, so anyway, this is kind of already getting away.
Yeah.
this is already getting away from what we're trying to do here.
But I think we can.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, we can end it there, but I would like to just comment and say that you can go back to Neolithic periods and back in history, hundreds of thousands of years, and look back at how we've evolved as societies and as humans, and slavery and hierarchies and power structures, right? This has existed forever. This isn't something that suddenly came about during capitalism or agricultural industrial, revolutions. This is something that's always existed. So I think this is more of actually a human problem, not necessarily a problem exclusive to capitalism. And we can see that in the way that it manifests itself in basically any system, political system or economic system that we've attempted on this planet.
So I think that we could debate that later, Jake. I think right now the
when
questions
we
are
get to
being
the social,
asked.
we have something on socialism later in another episode, then we can fully immerse ourselves in all things socialism versus capitalism, I guess. So we'll just move to the next topic. Jake, you want to hit the Green New Deal?
The Green New Deal, yes. Well, I mean, I guess I would just simply ask, do you guys think that the Green New Deal would do enough to achieve the goals that we need to environmentally, to prevent the kind of environmental destruction that I assume is the goal of these programs? Do you think that the Green New Deal would actually be effective? And I guess, do you think that protecting our environment is only possible in a world where capitalism doesn't exist?
Here's where I think this is where we split. My friends and I split here. I have issues with the Green New Deal. I don't think that you can have any solution to the climate crisis under a capitalist system. Ultimately, the means or the goal under a capitalist system is to exploit all of the resources, and that has been going on. We see constantly now that the world is being depleted of its natural resources, and now we have man-made objects heavier than the mass of natural objects. Recently, I think it was that I saw a report, and so we are continuing to destroy this system. So I obviously don't think that we can try to find some remediation under this system. But at the same time, here's where I struggle with this. It's that as much as I would love for a more egalitarian society, and I'm waiting for a revolution, or I'm hoping that a real insurrection. Jesus, that's going to get me kicked off here. Well, I hope that something comes along, but until then, I think that we have to put buffers in place, and I've said this before. I think that we need some band-aids until this other revolution, this other new system comes in, and I'm not sure when that will be. But what's happening now is forests are being deforested, and the planet is just we're emitting greenhouse gases at an alarming rate. The USA is second, I think, second from China. I think we last checked, Jake, you and I. And it is and there are other more populist, more overpopulated countries, and yet look at the USA. It's such a wealthy country, and it is overwhelmingly polluting the earth. And whether you think it's the greenhouse gases that's the issue, or you think it's just the pollution and the contamination that we're causing to our environment, to me, it's all around the climate or global crisis of destroying our natural habitats and polluting our earth, and also continuously producing greenhouse gases. So Can the Green New Deal do anything? Not to my liking. I have lots of issues with it. But can it put some band-aids? I think it can. Something is better than nothing. And here's where they will disagree with us, or with me. Something is better than nothing. I think that if we invest in renewable energies, if we find we're so advanced technologically that the current renewable energies aren't exactly what I also think are the solution, but if we look for ways, if we actually invest our intelligence into seeking ways to ensure clean air, clean water, healthy food, and all the basic human rights that we need under a better planet, then I think we can achieve it. I think that we can. I think the humans are very capable of doing it. But there's no economic incentive in doing that. There isn't. There's more economic incentive to mass produce and consumerist culture has a grab for plastics and easy throwaway anything and cheap ways to produce anything. So I have very little hope that we will be able to achieve anything under this system. That's why I think we have to do something to mobilize, but at least this little thing can do something better than nothing.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that the Green New Deal by and large is again corporate interests. The same old players dressed in green. It again shows that slow. If there was ever democracy in this country, which I question, obviously there was never complete inclusion of different sectors of people, that helped build this country, this nation, and this economic system. If there was ever democracy, that slow corporate coup d'etat, it's done. It's over. We live in a corporate dictatorship, and this is more of that corporate dictatorship, pretending to solve an issue that, unless we address this notion of that's implicit in capitalism of limitless production, unless we address that, we can't pretend to save this planet or society or, and I think there is a question about climate change later, but, regardless of what we think things are coming, something is changing, you see masses of people moving in the world. This is just the beginning, whether we think it's human made or not. Things are changing by the experience of people again migrating. I have family members that their houses have flooded, in the past few years. It's something that hasn't happened in 50 or 60 years, and so there are things changing. And again, this is the capitalists trying to capitalize on what's coming, on the anxieties of the newer generations.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is, far from slowing down what I describe as the attack on the environment that is endemic to a profit system, because historically it is not profits. No part of the costs of production are met out in terms of necessarily the water that you use, unless somebody has to charge you for it, or the resources of the planet. That's just something to often just be used that doesn't often show up on the balance sheet. This is what the capitalists are trying to do, is they're trying to put it on the balance sheet now. They're trying to financialize and commodify all the various resources of the planet. In fact, the World Resources Institute basically estimated that the entire global ecosystem yearly is worth, I think, 125 trillion. So they put a number on it now. And so now they're going to stick it into their market and treat every piece of the environment like GameStop stock that can be either short sold or pushed up its value. But none of this is going to be about protecting the environment. It's actually about making more money in Wall Street, on the global markets, using the environment as another place to speculate. So that's what's going to happen. And this is actually not going to, the Green New Deal is not going to slow down the attack on the environment. It's going to accelerate it.
Did you have any follow-up on that, Rob?
I mean, I think you guys, they hit most of those points, but I would say, when I'm looking at the Green New Deal, again, like Andy was saying, from an economic point of view, you're going to say you get an electric car. If you've ever priced them, and I've done that, I've looked at, what's it going to cost to have one not only from a payment point of view, but a maintenance point of view and an energy consumption point of view. It is literally outside the realm of most people's financial ability to own a reasonable car, to take them reasonably distant. And it's kind of an ironic twist of fate that the electricity that most power plants generate is coal-fired, at least in the United States. And you do have some natural gas in there, but again, it's fossil fuels that are fueling electricity that's going into the car. It's supposed to be better for the environment. So it's kind of like an odd little cycle. And then, or the wind turbine of the wind farm is made with plastic encased metals, and the oils and the lubricants that are used to keep it moving are, again, fossil fuel based. So are you really as green as you think you are? So the only question I'd say is, unless something makes economic sense, like if it's the same cost structure for the regular person, then I'm all for going into the new Green Deal. As far as, we want to switch to a different methodology to have a car powered. Okay, great. But unless the price of the car and the price of the maintenance and the price of the operating is just the same, then why would I go there to invest in that as a simple one person? Do you feel, I guess, the follow-up would only be on the Green New Deal? It almost means they want to scrap energy independence. You look at some of the executive orders with the Keystone Pipeline and other things they want to do to halt exploration or halt the ability to get more energy. Now, I agree to a point with Andy where it is about monetizing the whole nut. And that was a point of view that I didn't really think about until Andy brought it out, but it is. They are monetizing everything. And if they can monetize it, then they can make a profit out of it, and then they can exploit it to a point that we can't even think of right this second where that exploitation will go. But I don't want to scrap energy independence right now in the United States for a dream. We're going to go and we're going to have this now. We're going to go into green energy. We're all going to have wind farms to power everything. What if the cost of that energy takes your electric bill from a normal person in an apartment or a home, family of 2 or 4, from $100 to $500? Well, you're doing your part for the environment. It doesn't matter that you're bankrupt and you're going to lose your house. You can't afford your electric bill. So I guess the question is, why would we want to just charge down a road that has no economic or scientific benefit right out of the gate at this second to a future that would potentially decimate somebody economically? And talk about taking a class of people and moving them down the economic rung and feeling that weight of the upper class or the ruling class, like Andy had said. Why would we go down that road?
If I could, I would agree. I think probably most of us then would agree that the Green New Deal isn't actually going to do enough to solve the issues that we face. But I do just want to comment, though, Andy, you brought up, these external costs or externalities that are inherent in capitalism. I don't actually see that as something that's inherent in capitalism. Again, I see this as this is like corruption. Externalities are subsidized by a government that doesn't have to worry about taking risk or worry about not making a profit, because the government just brings in money by force, right? So they're not having to deal with the consequences of a free market. So this is actually centralization, and I see capitalism actually as controlling scarcity because it relies on market prices. Right. And when something is more scarce, it is a lot more expensive. Right. Nothing is free. There's a cost to everything. And I just don't see, I guess, how you control scarcity in a system that doesn't rely on markets and pricing, but actually relies on popular vote. Because if the majority or the 51% decides that they want to do something, it doesn't necessarily matter. Right. So how would you control that scarcity if 51% decides that they want to, mine a certain resource or develop a certain product, in that type of system? I just don't see how that is all of a sudden an issue that we no longer have to deal with because capitalism's, no longer in the picture.
Which Which thing am I responding to here? There's one thing here.
I'm just wondering how in a system in a non-capitalist system you would therefore control scarcity.
All right,
that's all.
I think unfortunately, Jake, you keep wanting to give it to the other conversation, but I'll do it. So I'll try to.
Well, no, it's very fundamental though. We're talking about the Green New Deal.
All right.
And Edward had brought up how in a capitalist system there's no way to control resources because it's just profit motive, right?
And like I said, the Green New Deal is just an escalation of the capitalist attack on the environment. It's nothing new. Capitalism has been destroying the environment for quite some time. It does it through its normal operation. It does it through war. It does it through spreading depleted uranium all over the Middle East. And it's going to do it again. And let's talk about why it happens. And it's not because of scarcity. It's because there's a limited amount of resource for a maximizing and ever-growing amount of markets and a desire for capitalism, for the capitalist centers to produce stuff. So let's look at oil. And this gets us to energy self-sufficiency. Rob, I don't care about energy self-sufficiency under capitalism because I know that energy self-sufficiency under capitalism means we will have a global war. That's what the World War II was about. Who was going to control the oil? So who could use the control of that oil to then make sure that they could expand their markets and expand their production bases, all right? That's what that was about. The future war will be about data and oil, all right? So energy self-sufficiency under capitalism only means that my nation gets to secure the right for itself to make sure that its corporations can continue to monopolize violence at home and monopolize violence abroad in order to keep control of it. And it's not about scarcity. It's actually, there was a ton of oil in the 1940s and 1950s, but that did not keep the capitalists from fighting and killing 50 million people in a war that was about oil and markets and production. And it will not keep the capitalists from using nuclear power to control who gets to control the data, who gets to control the oil, who gets to control the resources. That's where this is headed. So energy self-sufficiency means that if I was really thinking about something like that with regards to my own country, I would basically be saying, I got to make sure that my rulers have the energy they need to exploit me and grab markets abroad. And I don't care about that. I need to take that control from them so it can actually be used by all the rest of us who don't benefit from their control of it.
I mean, I was just wondering how you control scarcity in a market that's based on democratic 51%, right, legislation, essentially. I just think that capitalism
conversation and the socialists, how do you govern, I suppose, Jake? And that might be a conversation about how would the socialist government or a socialist democracy work? And Jake, maybe we can discuss.
You got to let people like Kenny might have something to say and Eduardo have something to say. It's just the rules of the game today. I mean, you're going to have to figure it out how to do it.
It's just listening. Yeah, it's just a listening, not debating or it's more.
No, I'm just trying to understand very fundamental things to what you guys are saying, right? Because if you're saying that in a certain system, right? If you're blatantly saying that in one system you have all these issues and that's the cause of it, but in the other system it wouldn't exist. I'm just trying to understand how that's possible, right? Like, what's that distinction there? Because it seems to me that capitalism seems to be a very easy scapegoat to just blame all these issues on that seem to be inherent in pretty much every political system, you know?
And I'm going to have to recommend that you sit with your lack of understanding and just let Kenny answer and Eduardo answer and not have to understand. Maybe you don't understand. That's me fine. We can have that conversation offline. But I didn't necessarily understand everything that when people speak in an interview, I don't understand everything they say, but I give them the space to say it. So you're going to have to just sit with your own lack of understanding, ask your question, and hear the answers.
All right. I mean, I've been listening. I think I've been giving you guys the space to interject at any time.
Not enough. I disagree. You're inserting yourself far too much in this conversation.
Okay.
Well,
then I'll censor myself a bit. Then I'm sorry.
Just ask the question. Hear the answer. That's all you have to do, dude.
Yeah, I think Eddie's saying is the conversation. We're getting a lot into the socialism versus capitalism conversation, and that is going to be the impetus of another episode. So, for the sake of keeping this in our time slot or timetable, we'll just kind of move to the next kind of topic on that. kind of like in our general topics. Granted, there can be elements of socialism and capitalism and how that economic structure and the government structure support one another. And I'm very interested to hear these points of view and just kind of listen through it. And when we get to a point where we're going to have a more of a debate style day, then we can kind of dive in and kind of get towards each other. And I don't think anybody's going to say, I'm not going to become a Marxist overnight, and Andy's not going to become a capitalist overnight. But there is, well, it sounds on the fringes of that, but I think Andy's version of, and Kenny or even Eduardo's version of socialism in the left is not radical in the purest sense of the word. I think that it is more structurally based and a different conversation than the mainstream left is having. Whereas our conversation about how the right is acting towards economics is not necessarily mainstream Republican thought. Like, I don't agree with anything that's going on in the what they call the new monetary theory policies, where we just print ourselves out of debt and we just print ourselves into whatever we want to spend money on, and we have no inflation. Eventually, macroeconomics will take its toll. But these are conversations we'll have at another point. So let's move to the next part of that. And kind of climate change and Green New Deal kind of morphed itself together. So we'll get to a kind of an epidemic conversation. Is the left always talks about taxing rich people, but they never draw that line as who's rich. I mean, do you all feel that rich is determined by an annualized income of an individual, a net worth, or combination of the two? Where do you kind of feel not yourselves, not so much or Biden, but Biden will never talk about, well, we feel the rich start at, I mean, you can kind of see it right now in how they're doing the stimulus payments, who gets it and who doesn't get it. And now this next third or fourth wave of stimulus payments, they're even taking it down further and further into another niche. So you're really getting a small glimpse behind the Oz curtain as to who is rich in their eyes. And guarantee you, if you're making 50 to 80,000, you may not feel rich, but they think you've succeeded enough that maybe you don't get as much as somebody below 50. Doesn't mean that you have a family of 5 and you're barely hanging on versus a couple that are making 50,000 total and they don't have any real total responsibilities like that, but they're going to get a full slice of the pie and you're barely going to get a crumb. So how do you feel like what is rich defined as in this country today?
So to me, again, that, tax the rich is another liberal soundbite to galvanize people into their political intentions and ultimately to exploit everyone. So I'm not concerned about taxing the rich. I believe in redistribution at the workplace because I believe in workers being able to run, their workplaces democratically and dealing with what we need to deal with. So I don't think, just taxing the rich implies trusting a capitalist state that is governed by the capitalist class. So it doesn't make a difference to me, how much money we get from the rich, because, we as a society, we need a bunch of things here. And we know they can obviously print money, like you said. They have plenty of money to go to war and engage in nefarious things, while, a lot of us, and also bail out corporations. Well, most the working class, the working people, face the brunt of capitalism. So socialism for the rich, basically, and that is used sometimes weaponized by the liberal left. But but socialism for the rich or the corporations, really, and capitalism for the working class, for the the people that struggle. And so I'm not mad that I'm not even so mad at Bezos, for example. Like he's done what he's gamed this system, in down, like, because he found out how the hell it works. He's at the top of it, and so I'm not mad at him. I face the system itself. I don't, and there's plenty of people that think they're capitalists but have no capital. So that's another issue here. Like
Yeah.
you claim to be capitalist, but you're working class. You're struggling. And so even if you're making $200,000, that's my brother and my sister-in-law, and they're struggling. Being middle class sucks. If you be middle class, you're gonna go into debt. If your kids have to go to college, you're gonna go into debt. If you're rich, obviously you can pay for it. If you're poor, you can get some programs and some ways to game the system. And sometimes that is weaponized against the working people, saying that everyone's cheating. But you know what? The cheating is happening at the top. So again, I do believe in redistribution, not through taxation, because again, this system has been rigged to benefit these people. And so, again, I'm not answering your question, I guess, who's rich. I'm more concerned about who's capitalist and who governs and who shapes society and who shapes the game, really.
Again, this is where I'll split with my friends here. I think that a redistribution of income should be in place. That would require a revolution for us to tear down this entire system for that to happen. And until then, I do think that we need to acknowledge that the majority of someone's wealth has been gained through the workers, and the people who, it's not the administrators. The administrators aren't always hands-on on their like if you think about Amazon, you're not having Jeff Bezos created a product, right? The product to have the access to buy things online, but because of the technological move, like we could talk about all the different factors that came into place for that. But the workers are the ones who are actually being able to keep that machine or that production going. And it's the workers that are really being whether exploited by their work labor, their the hours, the pulp they put in, and a little bit of money that they get. So I do think that until we have some new system, they need to have some form of compensation, because ultimately all of the resources that exist belong to us. We're the ones investing in it, and immigrants especially that come to this country, they pay their taxes, right? And they don't get something in return for that. And I think that the top 0.01% of the people who are gaining are people who have massive control over the economic system, like Google and the CEO of Google and Bill Gates and Warren, and they could basically feed the entire planet. Well, this is where they could basically give us all enough money to survive on with other money combined. And I think that if we just thought about taking from the rich to give to the poor, that would be something that, at least under this system, which I know my friends here disagree, would be able to give us sort of I don't want to use the word equalizer, but give us sort of a balance, so to speak, even though it'll still be a hierarchical system.
Yeah, and of course I support the fight of workers and any people who are being exploited at their workplace or who don't have a job, to try to redistribute through their government and taxation. It just won't solve the problem. First off, there's a few things hidden with that word rich and poor, because I think most people think of it in terms of income. And they think of like basketball players or movie stars or even these corporate heads who have giant incomes. But income disparity in this country exists. Obviously, what is it? The top 1% incomes are commensurate with about the bottom 40% of the population in terms of the numeric value. But that's not where the real inequality exists in society. The real inequality exists with wealth, where the top 1% wealth, meaning the ownership of assets, the ownership of stocks and bonds of actual means of production that Marx was talking about. In that case, what you have is that inequality gap is 100 times greater than the income gap. There was something I'm seeing here that the top 1% owns in this country owns $34.7 trillion of wealth, not income, of wealth. And the bottom 40% has about 250 billion. So that's 34.7 trillion to 250 billion. That's like astronomical difference. And that really shows, that is really where the inequality that's going to have to be solved. And that cannot be solved by taxation. That's going to only be solved through revolution of changing the system, of completely changing the form of government, of changing the form of the way things are produced. And that's because the other thing that's hidden under capitalism is the way that wealth has been gained is through the every day, every hour, every minute stealing from the workers that you have. The way you get rich in this country is not by having an income. You get rich by owning a business and having workers underneath you and taking a piece of their wage in the form of exploitation and retaining it in the form of profit, which you then go on to compete with other businesses about how you take those profits and reinvest them. But the existence of profit means the existence of theft. It means the existence of stealing from the collection of workers some piece of the value of their work and retaining it for yourself and using it as you want. And that's what's really been happening under capitalism all this time. So the reason it's not good enough to tax the rich is if somebody goes in and steals my house and takes everything from it and then says, here, I'll give you back your couch, that's not good enough. Or, hey, you can just live in this one room and rent it. No, we have to take back the entire house because it was built by us and it was stolen from us. And we're the one who have the right to decide how it gets used and what else we're going to do with it. And the capitalists have to be taken off the stage. So tax the rich doesn't get that done. Socialist revolution does.
So you're saying, I mean, just to kind of build off of that, in another question off of, and I agree with you that wealth itself is the bigger disparity than income. Although we like to talk about taxation of income as the benchmark. But when you talk about redistribution from the owner of the business to the workers, as well as just if you're not going to take the money through taxation and you're going to do it in another means, just giving somebody money doesn't mean they're going to be using it the right way for themselves to build that wealth. They could be just piss it into the wind like most lottery winners do. Here's $20 million. You took the lump sum, so here's a check for 12. And within 5 years, they have no money because they spend it frivolously. They don't think about building wealth. Granted, that's a conversation of education on wealth building, but I guess my question is if redistribution, how do I put it? If just giving the money to people isn't going to make them sustainably wealthy, how are you redistributing money to people? In what fashion? Just wages, additional wages? Or are they getting equity in the stake in the company? Because remember, I mean, some people built something from the ground up. Like I'll be frank, Bezos, like Kenny said, you got to hand it to the man. He built something, and he didn't necessarily get 20 million in equity capital to go start it up on his own. He didn't inherit it. He put the time in, he put the risk in, and then he gets the reward. Are you saying that reward should be limited? Or how is that wealth distribution? What's the texture of wealth redistribution, I guess is what I'm asking.
So the way I see it, that, that's why we talk about a socialist revolution, that is not just about redistributing money. Again, when I hear wealth, I'm talking about, who owns, for example, my house. Like, who do I pay to? When I'm for example, so we're going to have to talk about private property, things that we use for profit, not things that we use for personal use. So my house is my house because I use it. I used to have a landlord, but I no longer do. I don't have to pay rent anymore. If I want to live in a shitty condition, it's my problem. So I like Jake said, I also believe in individual liberty. If you want to live in a squalid condition, that's your problem. But you no longer have to pay rent, to someone so they have wealth. So now that wealth is yours automatically. And obviously there will be issues to figure out, like, why do some people have better housing than others? But fundamentally, I think that changes the way we do work, the way we produce things in a society, if we address things like that, that are private property versus personal property. So I am for, eliminating a private property, so no one makes a profit, but everyone has personal property, and and you have a right to that, inherent right to exist in a house, have healthcare and things like that. So yeah, when I talk about, if we're talking about wealth, that's what I talk about. It's not about income. And besides, we don't have, because I still, at least what I still hear questions kind of framed within the market system,
It's all I know.
Yeah, market system, and so I don't think of it. I think of fundamental things like housing, right? Like if someone has secure housing, even if it's shitty, like they're going to be motivated by a different, set of things, not a market system.
All right. I think, Andy, do you have anything else?
I mean, all I'll say is that the workers as we are now really are not fit to run society collectively, democratically. We aren't. And what will make us capable of doing that is the degree to which we will need to work together democratically in order to actually push the capitalists off the stage of history. And that level of organization, that level of collective action will require massive amounts of democracy, massive amounts of self-empowerment and collective empowerment through that. And that's how workers will be fit to essentially really use the goods that we've made and put them to use in the best of all possible way for each other together in something that I think would be truly democratic, because the democracy we will need to have a revolution is a mass democracy that we've never experienced, has been experienced in moments in certain countries, but then went away pretty quickly. And that's the one thing I would add to this is we will become fit to rule through the process of displacing our current rulers.
The next one was on minimum wage, and it's very timely in that, Biden wants to tack in a $15 an hour minimum wage. He hasn't revealed the details, and it's always the devil in the details as to how long they're going to give. Are they going to give a 10-year runway, a 5-year runway, 5-week runway? Who knows? I mean, you're doubling the minimum wage basically, because technically it's $7.25 an hour. The question I say is, why are we rushing to move this minimum wage when, I'll be frank, I mean, I can't hire a teller for less than $13 an hour. I mean, Walmart will start you as a part-time night shift person at $15 an hour. Some McDonald's in major cities are almost at $20. Bank of America has a minimum wage of their own at $20 an hour for entry level. So with so much in the market already moving that wage higher, why go through the symbolism of raising the minimum wage? And do you also think that minimum wage increases will create an inflationary effect in which, well, we haven't had inflation when they're printing money, but let's go beyond that. If they're going to raise the minimum wage, people will say, well, I'm making more money today. Well, true, but now prices have caught up 6 months, a year from now, and you have no more buying power than you did at $7.25 if you were only making $7.25, which I think we can all say that's not the wage people stay at. That's your entry level for the menial task labor. And then you build your skills and you move on from there. But right now, the market has pretty much shifted. I mean, minimum wage, you couldn't even get somebody to come to an interview for $7.25 an hour. And that's just for it's even for just a person doing cashier at McDonald's. So why are we rushing to make this $15 an hour? I know that a lot of union contracts are tied to that, so that helps pay people back, people who voted for Biden. So why do you feel that we're moving to this $15 an hour when you're not going to control prices? You're just going to send a wage higher, and eventually prices will work itself out, and you won't have any more buying power. Why do you all feel that we need to, or Biden's point of view of the left? Why is it this push to $15 an hour? Why is it relevant?
I think the framing of your question, Rob, is interesting. Why are rents high? Like living in a country where people are living below the poverty line level, in a country that's very rich. I mean, people are struggling to also pay their rent or pay the basic necessities. In San Francisco alone, it's even here, it's just very challenging to live on $20 an hour, just for rent and to live comfortably enough and to hold a family. I think that I have issues around the minimum wage because, to me personally, it doesn't even go higher than that. But I know why my friends who are progressives and liberals they push for it. It's because of the necessity to start living at some way that it's some quality of life that they're able to sustain themselves and their families. So I get that that's there. But the living in this country is a challenge, and especially if you live in the cities, and if you live in, I also remember people were struggling when I was in Emmett, Idaho with Jake, and it's not doable to live on just even on the basic minimum wage.
I agree with you, Rob. With the basic economics that I know. Eventually the net effect is zero at best, but it's actually worse. San Francisco is that clear example that we raised the minimum wage to about 16 right now. But like Eduardo says, rents are higher, small businesses are struggling. And they adjust. It becomes more work for workers, even if they're paying higher wages. And obviously, there's also a separate system of taxation for small businesses versus top businesses that also put another pressure on small mom and pop places. So again, that's not a solution. I think that it's another liberal hurting soundbite. To kind of appease the base, to some degree, and call it, we've done something. But fundamentally, if you're not addressing, the system that creates all these pressures in people's lives, like healthcare, like housing, that money's not enough. Even the money that supposedly the market corrects, I have friends, like Eduardo said, that work in Bank of America. Minimum wage here is $22. But if you do the math, an average room, not a house, is $1,200. Food and all these things, healthcare. I have pretty good healthcare right now, but I pay $300 a month. So you add the things up, and the market itself has a life of its own. The market itself, in effect, make people struggle. Because the market is rigged to extract the most that it can, and so there is no way to control the market, really. You even with the house, like rent control in San Francisco too, what that has produced is many people hoarding houses. There were until recently about 10 to 12,000 houses in the Bay Area here, empty houses, because people rather sell it in the market, waiting for a day where the prices go up. And yet we have one of the, the biggest houseless populations in the nation. And so again, minimum wage hasn't resolved that. It's all these market factors that create these social issues, at least in my mind.
I suppose too,
Oh, go ahead, Edward.
That I have issues. Like, I understand you. Like, I'm not trying to dismiss your question, Rob and Jake, but the question really should be, why are we allowing people? We're talking about working class families that are trying to make ends meet. And the question should be, why are we allowing in this country for rich people to make thousands and millions and billions of dollars? That's the question I wonder when we allow people like Amazon not pay any taxes, and you allow Apple not pay taxes, or we have offshore tax havens, and people find all kinds of loopholes to get away with evading taxes or to make as much money and profit. And we just saw Jeff Bezos taking advantage of the tips of workers. The question is not about why is it, it's about why are we allowing, it's the rich people who are the issue, who have tons of money that we could actually redistribute, as we were talking earlier. That is the issue that I think. I'm not trying to, again, not like, I know you have it's an economic question that you have, Rob, but the framing of it is, to me, and I know I'm not talking about your intention here, Rob, but the framing of it to me is, it's about, again, shifting the focus. It's a distraction to me. I'm not saying that's your intention, Rob, but it's shifting the focus away from the rich and white collar crime and the bureaucracy that exists, to putting it on why working class families are working class families, which is, we're not able to do it. We're able to do it. I think we're able to do it. I think that if we actually paid close attention to rich people getting away with tons of cash, like they did with Jeff Bezos, like I mentioned, then we'd actually have that's the real question to me.
Yeah, I think the one thing, and before Andy comments, I think just my comment on that would be, I hear what you're saying. I think too that you're with minimum wage jobs or a certain wage minimum, some jobs are designed to only make so much money. They're not designed to. I'll give you an example. I had an employee a couple companies ago. I was working as a VP of collections for a bank, and this kid was a collector, younger person, probably in his late 20s. And he comes to me pitching for the next level of income, and I'm like, well, I know we can work on something for you, but his whole pitch was he just wants to do his job and make $50,000 a year. So I'm like, well, the job doesn't really have that structure to pay that much money. And we can make the arguments of how much a job is worth through a skill set, and is the socioeconomic and the ability for that person to get a degree or get the training necessary to get that yield available. That's a whole different discussion. But let's set that aside. And I told him, I said, well, you're at like 25 and some change now. To get to 50 at the 3% crumb that most corporations are giving, you're going to be 45. You're not going to see the backside of 50 grand. But if you're going to stay in that job, but if you move yourself up, change jobs, get a promotion, the income will get there quicker than you think. But he said, no, I just want to do this job, but I want to make this money. I'm trying to explain to him, it's not really how, I granted it's a structure of capitalism, I understand that. But this job isn't designed to make 50,000. You're designed to cap out at about 30, 35, and then hopefully you get a promotion. To do the same job, you're only going to get a very minimal wage increase. I mean, I've never had my income move because I waited for somebody to bestow upon me, this is your new wage. Good luck, and I hope you like it. It's always been get new skills, get another gig, move up, or at least, in the context of the structure we're in. So, I mean, that's one thing to think about when we're talking about, why can't people make enough money to survive in California, in San Fran? I mean, I'll give you an example. You talk about one room being $1,000. I mean, we're in rural Ohio. I mean, you can't get a decent apartment around here for less than $1,200. That's a mortgage payment for most people, and that's insanity. Do I think there could be some structure? But I just digress. But I was just trying to say there are jobs designed in a certain way to cap out at certain income levels, and just the people have the requisite skills to get that next job. Those are socioeconomic discussions to have much further on. But go ahead, Andy. I'm just wanted to interject that.
I guess what I would say is that, like the guy who's coming in, I mean, most people are as workers. So we live in a class divided society of that we have people, set of workers who make a living, or who get around by earning a wage given the job that they're either asked to do, trained to do, allowed to do. Somebody hires them to do it. That's how they make a living. There's another set of people, and it's a minority set of people, who are capitalists, who don't make money. That they don't make money by working a wage. They make money by the ownership of the asset, and then using our work to essentially skim some piece of that off so they can continue to make wealth. So those two sets of people exist in the same society, and those two sets, capitalists and workers, are diametrically opposed to each other. They have opposing interests. So for all the time that capitalism exists and all the time that workers have existed, those two classes are really at war with each other. But what we've seen is that over the last at least 30 to 40 years in this country, since the 60s, it has been a very one-sided war where one side is organizing and basically taking and extracting wealth from the other side, and the other side is just trying to make do on an individual basis as best they can, and there hasn't been a lot of collective struggle. There is no individual answer for workers. The only way we will answer the puzzle of capitalism is by collective struggle. And so I understand and I support all struggle of workers to fight for a better wage, for more benefits, for any change that they want to make. But I will say this, there will be no wage change or any benefit change that they will solve, but still maintaining capitalism. So that's why for me, when I look at what's important in a struggle, is not so much, did we fight for a $15 minimum wage? Did we fight for a $30 minimum wage? But first, did we fight? Did we fight to get this? Because most of these things, some of these things that are just granted without a fight, there's something else going on. Green New Deal is a perfect example of that. And I'm more interested in finding out how workers are changed through that fight, because it's through that fight for changing their lives that I think a new society can be built. And so for me, that's what's more important, is workers are going to continue to get screwed. They will continue to fall behind. Like Rob, you mentioned before, I think inflation is going to knock out a lot of things, including the value of my pension later on. And
yes.
The only thing that will make it so that I can survive is not me, as what I do as an individual. It's going to require me and other workers fighting together to transform society. And so for me, what's more important is how are workers changed through the struggle, more than what are the changes that they might make to some rule or wage or benefit. Yes, that can help, but unless we solve this riddle of capitalism, in my opinion, it's all going to go bad.
And so to me too, it's not about a set of policies or this or that. It's the ultimate goal is to conquer political power. Impose our will, and in a democratic way. And that is going to require us learning how to do that again in a group setting, and how to light a fire under leadership. Like I don't trust anybody in power. Even like a union leader. And especially union leaderships, they are more accountable than any other politician, but we are in a situation where people are not in power. Because we haven't struggled, we haven't learned lessons. We haven't been defeated. I mean, we are being defeated, but not in fighting back. And so we're going to have to relearn that. And like, there are important things of this nation in the world, where workers have fought, things haven't been given. It takes a fight, and we have to learn how to swing back.
Well, the next set of stuff would be less economic and a little more policy based. So, Jake, take free tuition.
You know what, Rob? Why don't you go ahead and ask that one?
Okay. We talk about. I mean, Biden's out there been talking about free tuition and knocking down, people's loans, student loans, left and right. People play by the rules have already paid their tuition, already paid their student loans. They're getting nothing. So if we're now in a new game of let's hand out more money to people, I guess the question is why all of a sudden is this taking root? I mean, I do know that 1.6 trillion is out there floating in Sallie Mae, which is the student loan entity for the government. To forgive 1.6 trillion in the light of printing the next 5 trillion we've printed in 1 year doesn't seem like a lot. But I guess the question is, in free tuition, why are we looking to give free tuition, or why are we looking to eliminate student debt? I mean, you took the risk, you took a job, or you took a degree. Yeah, you majored in French literature, but how are you now expected that every taxpayer now is to pay your debt off? How do you reconcile that?
I'm offended, first of all, that you would say.
Are you a French lit major?
I speak French. I love literature. I have been promoting to.
I'm just doing that as a facetious way. I don't mean
to. That is the most insulting, horrible framing of your question ever. I'm a part of 3 book clubs, and I discuss literature with you. How dare I am a member
but
of. But
you're the anomaly, though, Eduardo. You're doing the job that you should be doing with French literature or literature degree or a fine arts degree. Most people who are doing that aren't going to do that. They're going to become a barista and then bitch about why they can't pay their student loans.
Okay. So let's go back to the question. So, well, and you know, it's funny. It's great you said that, Rob, because I do think that we devalue the arts. And I think that in any system, you know, I don't mean to digress, but in any system, whether it be a socialism, capitalism, I do think that we devalue the humanities, and which is what makes us human. It's creation, it's innovation, it's to be able to be inspired, moved, and touched by, you know, I mean, humans have had this for very long, right? I mean, we have drawn out in caves, and we have appreciated socialist songs have been passed down through workers and chants, and workers have, and people have always shared stories. So I think that we should always take in consideration when we talk about and attack the arts, especially under many Republican administrations, and Bush acknowledged it last time he was on a show once, that we have to be able to maintain it, right? Going back to your question, so free tuition, I think when, again, I understand you have an economic lens, Rob, and so maybe others can speak to that. I will say, we bailed out the banks in 2008. We bailed out a lot of people who played with our money, and which is why we had the recession that we did. And I think you might know where I'm heading with this. If we can bail out banks, and we also foreclose lots of homes, then we can certainly bail out students. We can certainly defund certain places like the military and allocate it in places where we could support, like education. I think anybody could see that we could fund education. I mean, democratic socialist societies are already doing it in Europe, and this is a country that prides itself in being the best at everything, as Trump used to say, the best at, you know. I think that this is the country that could show it if they so true valued education, but they don't. And I understand that nothing is free, and that's, again, they can speak to it about the system and how this isn't actually going to rid of our issues. But if we could then tax the wealthy or defund certain places, then we could have students go back to school and major in French literature. But it isn't ultimately about trying to it's not about trying to take away more money from the taxpayers who are already struggling. It's about trying to allocate different resources in different ways.
Well, first off, the biggest reason I think people are pushing for this and is that essentially a situation of indentured servitude is being created for young people today, and their reason for going to college is the reason that you gave, Rob, which is they go to their would-be employer and they say, well, you want to earn this much, but you don't have that skill set, or you don't have this degree, and so you need to get that degree in order to earn this much. They go to the college to go get that degree, and they come out $100,000 to $120,000 worth of debt. That wasn't the situation I was faced with when I was young, but that is the situation they're facing today. Right. And that is the logic, again, of capitalism. In terms of it's even starting to take place in Europe. That same process as their social contract is dismantled, because European capitalists have to compete with US capitalists who have to compete with Chinese capitalists. But the thing I would say is that we have to also remember what the education system is about. My job as a teacher is to indoctrinate future workers so they are allowed, so they understand, and they're not either aware of or they understand that they're going to be stolen from every day at their job if they do earn a wage. It's just about determining the terms of that theft. So my job as a teacher, as an educator, is to indoctrinate them that that's okay. And that's true of that's true at the elementary school level, that's true at the high school level, that's true at the college level. It's all based on the idea that you must accept the fact that you will be stolen from in your job because this is capitalism, but maybe you can improve the terms of that theft. Maybe you get stolen from less, or you'll have enough to hold on to for yourself so that you're not completely left behind and put in a prison somewhere or homeless. And that, so again, that's why while I definitely support the struggle to eliminate these debts and things like that, because essentially the right to be exploited we shouldn't have to pay for the right to get skilled so that we can be treated like an exploited piece of garbage at our work. Actually, that probably should be something society should be taking care of. Ultimately, that kind of society that actually doesn't just make education about just production or just efficiency and productivity, but about something else that's closer to something social and human, which is what college is often talked about. You certainly don't experience it in public education. You might experience it at a private high school where you're allowed creativity and expression and things like that. And you were told that you might be able to have something like that in college for those few people who get there, and that's also shrinking down. But if education is ever to once again recover the notion that it's something about humanity and human and learning for learning's sake, we will definitely have to have a revolution. It ain't going to happen under this system, and it ain't going to happen whether we have free tuition or not, because college is another part of the exploitation mill that exists in under capitalism. It's just a higher paid set of people.
And you ask, why is this being floated around now? This idea of paying off the student debt. I actually think it has to do more with where we're heading. The big project of herding the masses of working class people into a certain sector. So I actually think it's part of kind of training the labor force for a new set of skills that are going to be demanded in order to compete with China, who is way advanced in data mining their people and surveilling their people, in which is the future of capitalism. And so again, I think that it seems benevolent on the surface, but it's actually it's preparing us for a new cage, I guess, that is actually that world is being created. That's another topic, but so it's and at the same time, by bailing out the students, you're bailing out really the financial system, because a lot of people that I know, they're like, fuck this, I'm not gonna pay this in my lifetime. I'm just gonna pay the minimum. Like they know, like and so if enough people default, what happens? So it's really about saving the financial system, not saving people.
Yeah, I think the dirty secret in Sallie Mae, people don't know the statistics, but at any one time, you have almost 50% of the student loan debt either in default or on deferment. So while you got a $1.6 trillion float, cash flow wise, it's not the greatest loan for an investor like Sallie Mae to have, because you're not getting a lot of payments. You may be accruing a lot of interest and burdening them with even further debt payments that go on in perpetuity. They don't cut it off. And I think that might be one of the things that they can look to is, okay, you have 10 years to pay it off, but if after 10 years you're still not paid off, then it's forgiven, or something, some variant thereof. So you don't carry that weight forever. Hell, I know lawyers that have been practicing for 20 years that are still paying off student debt from law school. Now, granted, no one told them to write sign the payment, but that's what the profession they wanted. But they've had this debt. I mean, we do it all the time in banking. I'll tell you right now, like for doctors, when we're doing loans for doctors, we ignore their student loan debt and their debt to income ratios when we're determining a loan, because we know that burden is there, but they're such high earners, at least most of them, if you're not general practitioner, you're going to be making $200,000-300,000. You're going to be able to maintain the payment. You just don't have your debt to income ratio would be blown out of the water. No bank would give you a loan because you carry all this debt. So I think the one thing, like Kenny, I think another point to build on what you had there too was government will start to change the cage if they're going to be paying the tuition and no one's going to have debt coming out of schools. They're going to start to decide what slots, what cage someone's going to be in. Oh, we have enough lawyers. You're not. Would you like to be a engineer? Well, I don't really have a propensity to math. Too bad. This is what you get to be. You want to be in the humanities, like Eduardo. Well, we really need people working in this sector now. So I think you're going to see a rash. If the government is going to lurch in on this, just like they're lurching in on Medicare, I'll get to that one in the future here in this conversation. If they're lurching in on higher education, eventually they can only get there by rationing, and they can only get there by pigeonholing people and determining, oh, you get to go to university and you do not, and you get to be a baker and you get to be a plumber, and this gets to be, you're not going to have choice because they control the money. They control, and then let's go one step higher. The universities themselves, they're going to have free money rolling in and no consequence. I mean, right now you can sign your life away. The school gets all this money, they get all the tuition, but you get out of there with a degree and you're so far in debt you can't see the light. So who's really going to be getting in control? It's going to start to control the university, control the flow, and ultimately the individual is going to be rationed. I don't see any other model that comes from this if they can get their hands on controlling the debt structure or the method by which people pay for that next level of education. That's just my comment on that. Jake, do you have any thoughts on that?
To be honest, I'm not really sure how to follow up. It seems like every response and answer I've heard from everyone so far is basically that, any of these problems or issues that we see are just inherent in capitalism, and that within a socialist system, these things, we wouldn't have these problems, So without really getting to the meat or, following up on that stuff, I'm not really sure how else to respond to it. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get off topic, I guess for me, the way that I am interpreting these topics is that, how it's very easy to complain about all the problems we have and just blame it on a certain system without offering any solutions. And so the way that I'm interpreting these questions is in regards to these topics, how are these things going to be dealt with under your system versus the current system? But all I'm really hearing is that, well, this isn't going to work, and it's only happening within a capitalist monetary system, and that's the issue. And I'm having a really hard time wrapping my head around the fact that, well, what kind of system can we look at, right? Like you guys are talking about a system that has no money, right? That's redistributing everything, and is a socialist society. So without really following up into more fundamentals on how it works, I don't really know what else to say, to be honest. So.
You could then say some of the stuff, you can respond to some of the stuff I have said that I have that's not necessarily the opinion of Andy.
Then
for example, I have a question for both of you that if I'm not trying to, this isn't a back and forthy one, but this is something I have thought about. There was the Wall Street speculation tax that I had thought about that could potentially bring in revenues of $2.4 trillion within a 10-year span, that I thought could be a way to also be able to deal with some of the issues that we have around being able to pay or cancel debt and pay for tuition for college students. That would be an area that, and I know that Andy and Kenny would say that that's not even something that I would consider, but that is something that under Bernie Sanders' plan and the Warren plan that they had proposed, that I'm just, if we don't digress too much, if you could just quickly respond to that. That would be something that, you both.
I don't think taxing speculative investments is going to do anything to solve our fundamental problems, if that's what you're asking.
All right.
I think if when you talk about taxation, especially of the space spatial dimensions of who is dealing in speculative trading, like the things we've seen with GameStop or institutional trading, or even, because you're not talking about mom and pop buying low and selling high. You're talking about massive amounts of money moving at one time. To be able to tax the incremental change in that particular transaction, I would say, just like with the minimum wage, in the short run, you feel great because money is coming in. But in the long run, all things being equal, in a pure capitalist economic model, the free market will adjust, and loopholes or methodologies to shelter that funds. Eventually, there's a different theory in economics where it talks about the Laffer curve, and where at some point you tax people to the point where money stops coming in and it starts regressing, or it starts dropping because you've taxed it beyond repair. What they're not factoring into that theory is people have moved into different methodologies to shelter that, as much as the fact that incremental tax rate has gone up too far. It's just the reaction to that too far is, well, we'll sit on the sidelines and not do that methodology. We'll invest our money in a different way, or not invest at all. So, in the short run, yes, they will get their money. In the long run, it'll evaporate quicker because of the adjustment to the market. The market adjusts to the market. If you, it's like when they're talking about taxing capital gains at 45% or 50% or whatever Biden wants to throw out there. If you're doing day trading, it's going to hurt you. If you're just doing long-term investment, it's going to hurt you a lot. Imagine buying, Amazon 10, 15 years ago and getting it today, and then you sold your stock, and now you're going to get taxed 50%. That wealth build that you thought was happening is gone, because you bought in early and you held it. A lot of I deal with my elderly, with my parents and my uncles and aunts, where they ask me, should I sell this 3M stock I've held for 20 years? I go, well, if you need the cash, great. If you don't, keep the dividend. But if you got to sell it, you're going to get crushed. Capital gains will be crushing you. And, sometimes they sell it, sometimes they don't. But what I'm saying is, to your point, Eduardo, the market will adjust. People adjust to the taxation. So like we were talking earlier about, can we incrementally tax the rich to a point? You can, but once they start sheltering and sitting on the sidelines, the money's just aren't going to come in at the same level, unless you change the system up unto itself at a level that we're not even at yet.
I think that people need to understand that you can't just redistribute wealth or what's being created or resources, right? These things wealth is being created. It doesn't just exist, so you can say that you're going to start to redistribute all these resources, but you're going to run out if somebody's not still creating them. But if I could just say, based at least on this topic, Edward, you were talking about creativity. I think that in a capitalist system, creativity is actually one of the most valued things in this system. Openness and innovation and creativity. This is what drives our economy. This is what drives new technology. And in this country, you get paid, I think, more than anywhere else for offering something within the creative realm, right? These people get paid more per hour than anybody. And I think the idea that they're, using this idea of free education in European countries, these countries aren't socialist, right? These are still countries that have a monetary system, that have private ownership, that have free markets. And I think also this idea of wages being stolen from you, you have to understand that if you're going to redistribute wealth, you have to take that wealth in order to redistribute it. So that's all I would say on this topic.
It's only certain creativity that is appreciated, though, not like poetry, right?
And I do agree that wealth will have to be redistributed, and it's not going to happen from the capitalist action. It's going to happen from the people who generate that wealth, which is the working class. So we'll get to those answers later. So I do think, Jake, you are getting the rough shape, at least what I think probably Kenny and I are saying, which is all of these problems are systemic and all of them come down to capitalism, we do believe we have a solution, and it ain't China, North Korea, Nicaragua, Cuba, or the former Soviet Union, my friend. It's something else. But we'll get there. And I would recommend we should get to the immigration question and the racism question, and then let's see if we can wrap it up.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, immigration. So in many countries aside from the USA, it is nearly impossible to become a citizen. They grant you work visas, but not to be a citizen. Why do we feel America should have a full open border and almost no hindrance to become a citizen?
So I'll respond to this. This is a constant question that's always asked. We talk about free trade. The capitalist class loves to talk about free trade and how we should have open markets and there should be constant free trade, right? We have open borders for mega companies. We have open borders for the rich. You can basically, if you have enough wealth, if you have a lot of wealth, you can live in a different country. Whereas the working class cannot do that. You can't just decide, oh, I'm going to live in another country. The wealthy class can. If Jeff Bezos said, I want to go live, in the Bahamas, or if I want to go live in Indonesia or whatever, he could. There is a huge, that is what I'm saying. That's what I don't get. When people talk about open borders, it's only some people can and others cannot. And the workers who pay their taxes, who come here and fear immigration, who are just trying to make a living to support their families, they're given all of these restrictions. But the product that they are making has no restriction. There might be a tariff here and there, whatever, but where do those tariffs actually pay to? Those tariffs aren't coming, that money isn't coming to the working class. That money isn't. Yes, maybe in some way, maybe you might say that trickles down, but it isn't coming directly to the people who actually are working and are part of that production. So you go and you go to other countries and you offshore and you exploit other workers because the laws here aren't the laws here are very, I don't think they're that strict, but they're not the same as you might be able to exploit some workers in India, or you might be able to exploit the factory workers in Mexico. So it's again, so that's what I just wanted to say. So I stand for open borders because I think that that we should live in a borderless global society. And we should really look and consider when people are talking about open borders, who is it really benefiting? Because we do have open borders.
Yeah, I would just say, in a free market, that's what free markets are: is free trade in between people and individuals. So I think the issues that you're bringing up are exactly the antithesis of a free market. So I would agree with you.
Yeah, that was interesting that I learned from you, Jake. I didn't realize you actually are for open borders.
Yeah, in a sense, yeah.
Kenny, you want to go next?
Yeah, so I think Eduardo touched on it that, what is the function of a border? But, it's a regulation of a market. It's about exploitation. NAFTA is the most obvious example in how, it led to mass migration, prior to NAFTA and, the closing of the borders by Bill Clinton, the beginning of that process of the modern border. People came in and out of the US, people don't want to stay here necessarily. Like, people like their countries, they like their culture, they like their language. But again, after NAFTA and, Clinton and all that, it essentially trapped people here. You had to choose, you come here or you go back home. And the problem too is that it gets framed as an issue of morality when it is an economic issue to me. And, again, NAFTA was to the detriment of, workers in the US. And again, that's one thing where the left fails to, understand, mainly the liberal left. And so yeah, it created the consequences that we have now. People that are, whose life had been looted away, and the Mexican workers, the semi-feudal order that they had, they could no longer compete with American corn. So again, I think this highlights what I think is a myth of a free market. It doesn't exist. There is no such thing. It is highly regulated and manipulated. And I think it ultimately benefits, again, the people at the very top and that hold the wealth. And while we are pinned against each other. And so I think until we understand that, we won't find a collective solution, but it has to be rationalized in economic terms.
Yeah, and I guess the thing I would add is that the birth of capitalism came with the birth of nations. It was the trick of the capitalists to basically try to unite their working class that they would exploit within their own national boundaries and say, hey, we all share a common goal here underneath this flag, whatever that flag would look like. If it's a Russian flag or a US flag. That's what patriotism about. That's what nationalism is about, is making a working class in their home country think that they have a unity with their capitalist class of their own country. And that is part of the myth of capitalism, that we are united. We're not. We are completely divided, and they use the exploitation of us to spread and use the profits that they get from that to spread their wealth abroad and attack workers abroad, or attack markets abroad, or control those markets abroad. So that's one thing, is the national boundary exists because of capitalism and will continue to exist until capitalism goes away. There are some people who think that multinational corporations go beyond the national boundaries. We are learning now how limited what they can do is, as Huawei goes up against Google. And guess who's going to underwrite what Huawei does relative to Google? It's going to be the strength of the US state and its naval power versus China's state and their strength of their state. And that's what the battle that's coming. That's what led to World War II. That's what's going to lead to World War III, is the fact that capitalists rely on their nation state to marshal the armies that they use to control things when profits are short. Because yes, there was free trade before, Eduardo, but now you notice trade barriers are starting to come up. That's because profits are becoming tight. We are replaying the script of World War I, of World War II. As Rob knows, this is what starts to happen as profits become tight. National boundaries have to go up. But let's go back to the question of keeping that national boundary. And there's a statement made often by politicians, both in the Democrats and Republicans, that somehow putting those national boundaries there and keeping immigrants out is going to defend and help us workers. It's the opposite, actually. That boundary there really is just about the capitalists controlling labor. Sometimes they want to let labor in. Sometimes they want labor coming in illegally so they can exploit it more. Sometimes they have to push it back out. They just want to be able to use that border and use their laws and control that border to control labor internally and control labor externally. Socialists have no interest in those borders. We are interested in uniting with workers across national lines. That's why I want, any worker who wants to come in here and earn a job, I want to unite with them and figure out how we can fight our boss together, and how do we spread that fight internationally, because there's no other future other than that. And this is where things like racism play such an important role in keeping us down. Is it basically racism makes me think somehow that brown worker from the South or some African worker coming across the Atlantic is somehow threatening me. In reality, they're my ally in this cause. And until I understand that, I'm actually going to be really at a disadvantage to fight the system that is actually making all these problems exist.
I would just say the struggle and the fight and the power hierarchy that exists amongst attaining and controlling resources has always existed, long before we had money or even markets, capitalism, etc.
For sure. We'll go to the systemic racism. We've heard through the summer how it seemed like everybody, you notice how the mainstream media gets their talking points and every talking head says the same exact thing. So we always heard, when you got kind of out of the, lack of a better analogy, the propaganda playbook out of Stalin or Hitler. You keep saying it long enough, it's become true. And I touched on this in our last interview about, is systemic racism real? And I want to ask for your points of view on, is it real? And if so, you know, and if it does permeate our society to its core, how does one explain where people of color across many industries, not just in, you know, the most visible like celebrity or sports, but across all spectrums where people of color have succeeded? So if the system is dirty to its core in systemic racism, how does one even become a rise up from that and succeed in light of it? Or is the system just letting people have enough success, but not too much? I don't know. I mean, for me, from the last conversation we had, I do believe 100 years ago, definitely systemic racism permeated a lot of things. And as time evolved, and more importantly, those narrow-minded people died, things got better. You know, we didn't pass the Civil Rights Acts with the Dixiecrats. We did it, I'll be frank, we did it with Republicans. So if people are systemically racist, as they want to now kind of frame Republicans in that light, when if you look back in history, you know, those are the ones that helped most peoples out of situations or fought for civil rights. At least the party of Lincoln felt that way. Party of Kennedy, you know, also came into that with the DNC. But the point is that if it's systemic, how do others are succeeding in a systemically racist society? How does it exist? And if so, how do we explain the anomalies, I guess, of people succeeding in a totally core racist society? Does it exist? Systemic racism.
I mean, I could take a shot at it.
Okay.
And if that's all right. I think especially on the right, when people are talking about picking yourself up by your bootstraps, or people are talking about meritocracy, you can potentially maybe even talk about the challenges around people's mental health. I think it's about mental health really, when people feel that maybe there is some obstacle about their self-esteem, whether they're able to do something, whether they have the will or the motivation for it. I think sometimes the conversation centers around, you are capable, you have all the resources possible, and it's normally a right-wing talking point about it's just your mind and you need to get through it. And no, so I think that maybe there could be a case around that, but I'm not going to discuss that because I think it's conflated with the larger system that is there to uphold racism. So I'm just going to put that to the side, and I'm going to talk about. Ben Shapiro loves to say things like, if there is racist society, if there is a system that is racist, point to it. Where is it? Because we've got rid of Jim Crow laws. We've got rid of segregation, right? What is there really? And I point to two areas that I think are systemic. When we look at institutions, it's the medical industry and the prison system. And you can clearly see this outlined in the book, The New Jim Crow, where the war on drugs have really targeted, especially people of color, right? Where there's mass incarceration. And now we look at the opioid epidemic, right, which is seen differently, and that many, unfortunately, mostly white families have been plagued by it. And there's a difference in the way that has been treated. The other one is the medical system. And I was just telling Jake the other time that I was listening to a podcast called The Reveal, and it talks about how women of color have been subjected to sort of not barometers, certain pregnancy or estimated calculators to determine if they'll have a C-section or if they'll have a natural birth. And the history with these measures, or the calculator that was used, has been invented and still used today, but invented by racist scientists who clearly state out that they are racist and that they think that females of color cannot be able to reproduce naturally. They have to have a C-section. And the women today are still using this, the medical industry is still using this calculator on them. And that is a legacy that is still happening to this day, which if you want to make the case and say, well, what are the obstacles? What is it that's holding people of color back? These are the obstacles that are holding people of color, that are the legacy from the past continues to live on to this day, such as this calculator that is monitoring or deciding how women would have the pregnancy. Those are two examples within institutional racism that exist, that people of color face all the time, that white people don't realize that they don't have those, right? If you get measured by this calculator as a white person, because you have to check it, your race has to be checked by this calculator. And I can send the link, by the way, if anyone is listening to this and people are more curious to know the details of this, I'll put the link in the episode notes below. And it's a fascinating investigation that people who check off that they're a person of color, already the rate of being able to have a natural birth goes down. And if you're white, your rate of being to give a natural birth goes up higher. You're able to. And so you're not going to be seen as someone by your doctor that you won't have a C-section. How do you then deal with that as a person of color? If you are measured through everyone else's ways of seeing you by the color of your skin, people sometimes say, why you keep making it about race? Why you keep making it about race? And I always answer, I'm not making it about race. Everyone else seems to be making it about race. People are making it about race. I'm not trying to make it about race. Every time I show up to some place, and I remember this happening in Emmett, people already have in Idaho, where if I remember being in a small French town, people are already making it about my race. I'm not trying to make it about my race. And what do? Like, I can't help it that I look differently, that I'm brown, that I'm Mexican. You know, that is the life that I was born into. And so that's just the one piece. Now, I know Kenny and Andy are going to talk about something else, but that's just the piece that I'm talking about. It's the legacy of racism, of policies that exist, that continue to persist and are still alive and well used today. And that's what we're calling institutional racism. If you don't believe it, like, I don't know how else. Like, obviously, it's not like, I don't think a lot of my friends are going around the world saying, like, I know there's, I'm not going to go there, but it's not about, a lot of people are saying, it's because I'm black that they did this, or it's because I'm brown. A lot of us, like myself, I just tried to be somewhere, someplace, and people made it about my race before I was able to speak up for myself.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to Eduardo, but again, I'm not, once people know me, my struggles, it's a different thing. And I think that's part of the process of revolution, to see each other as individuals, as people, as people in a common struggle. But yeah, Eduardo mentioned the new Jim Crow. I think Michelle Alexander makes a good argument about, the economic reasons of racism. The U.S. has, in my experience, I've lived abroad. I was born in Guatemala. Guatemala is also, there's 40% in native indigenous people there, one of the countries in Latin America with the highest number of people, and there is definite racism, but the level of brutality didn't reach the level of brutality that it reached in the U.S. And so I agree with Eduardo, it has a legacy, but people don't kill people for shits and giggles by and large. I do think there's people that are sick, obviously, but a systemic thing like slavery was an economic institution, and so they needed to create this justification. This justification was created to uphold that system, and that system obviously evolved. It didn't go away. It became the new Jim Crow. That's what the Jim Crow. That's what Michelle Alexander argues, and then eventually became mass incarceration. But it has a role in this capitalist system. So I do, and we can go on to argue why I do think it does exist. But again, I attach it fundamentally to this particular system that benefits from us, from for example, a poor worker in the South aligning with the landlords when they were, living like shit. Like that's something that doesn't get discussed in public. That yes, actually some slaves may have had better like quality of life versus the white workers. In that ended in Bacon's Rebellion. That's what Michelle Alexander makes an argument. But then again, you have to insert this into the people that can, overthrow your system. And so it benefits people to see each other on these racial lenses. And I don't think the left is doing a very good job at explaining that, and again, we just want, and I think one of the problems too is that some people feel attacked, and that's where the left doesn't have enough understanding and sympathy. Like, the most economically abused over the last 30 years have been white people, white men in particular. They've lost a lot of, power, economic power, in my mind. And so, of course, there is, some shit happening in uprisings. But my story is like, listen, the Mexican worker is not your problem. It's the people that created that situation where you have to compete with them. And so, again, racism to me is institutionalized. It manifests in different ways. It hasn't gone away. It by evidence of, because either there is institutionalized racism in my mind, or a certain type of people are just inferior. Because there's some masses of a certain type of people that are not progressing. And so those are the two options for me. Either it is systemic, or they're just inferior.
Could I ask you a question, Kenny? Just a quick question. I was wondering, how do you believe that whites have lost a lot of economic power? How do you think that took place within the current system?
Well, through NAFTA. Through NAFTA, a lot of industries have been washed away, in the U.S. So I think that's why Trump wasn't wrong. It has been washed away. They've been brought, taken abroad. And so, there's economic deserts in this country, like wastelands, in the industrial cities, for example. Like that's what Trump was appealing to. That's why, the anxiety that, like in West Virginia, right, the coal mines, when Hillary Clinton arrogantly came and said, we're going to take your jobs away. That's real anxiety. It has devastated communities. So there is a lot of communities in Middle America that have been devastated, and by and large, they're white. And so we're not considering these things from the left, and like the liberal left, their appeal is to shame, people that are struggling. And so that, I think that's what the big failure is. And so, of course, if there is no political space for you and you're framing an issue as a racial issue, then you're going to have to find your own kind.
If I may, can I, Andy?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's very interesting because we're having a discussion that's very challenging to have on the left for us. I think the three of us don't actually abide by the identity politics framework of using privilege. I sometimes will use it just as a counter argument with my friends, my liberal friends, because they love to use it, but then it's only when it's convenient for them, such as right now with the reopening of schools. But I do agree that there is something that we're missing around when we don't look at how the disparities even affect white people. I mean, I think my eyes were really, because I lived with Jake for some time in Emmett, Idaho, and I think for that, when I was an adolescent, I think the narrative for me in here in California on the West Coast was that it's white people in power, white people are rich, white people are the highly educated. And then I went to go live when I was an adolescent with Jake, and then we drove. Where did we go, Jake? There were so many trailer parks that I'd seen, people living below the poverty line, people struggling, and also just I started to understand what, and I don't use this as a derogatory, I'm not trying to, is that white trash sort of mentality, the redneck mentality. People, they'd even laugh amongst themselves. I remember, Jake, some of your friends would also call each other rednecks and sort of mock each other. And that was interesting for me. And that was my revelatory experience. So I understood that it's not just it's not a black and brown issue. Like the economic, disparities exist also within white communities. And I think that's what really has helped me to understand it and see that. So I agree with Kenny in that sense. And at the same time, like, I wasn't also treated. Sometimes I would show up and people already have preconceived notions about me, right? I couldn't help it. And people thought also. So I also realized that there was still that stigma around me. Like I said, I wasn't trying to make it about race. What could I do? You know, some people were just constantly saying, or they would say it in a way, if you remember, Jake, some people would say, well, you're not like all the other Mexicans or something, some form of that way, just trying to put me as
I think sometimes a lot of this, well, what you're referring to is really just a sort of ignorance, you know, that we're all prone to, right? Like, people have to have some kind of an interest in educating themselves, and it doesn't always necessarily come from a hateful place. So and I think because of probably the economic devastation and lack of education in some of these poor and rural areas, you do have this sort of ignorance sometimes that you just are conditioned to think a certain way or to hate a certain person, you know, which has been programmed into us, you know, this fear mongering.
Yeah. And the reason why I don't abide by that privilege framework anymore is because then I realized at that time, Jake, if you remember, that I was the only one that had a passport. That was the only one that had traveled abroad to 10 different countries at that time. And I realized that the privilege framework wasn't actually fitting in when we were trying to make, at least for me, my list of things that I was able to do, and that they weren't also some of the things the privilege framework at that time wasn't actually working for me as I thought. I was trained to think that, you know, white people had all these privileges, and yet they had also some of the limitations. And also, quickly, just to add, I also don't think racism is something that can just be said that white people can exhibit racism. I think that I have seen in Mexico myself of racism exist against Blacks and Central Americans that have immigrated to my country. There are so many Africans that are immigrating through Ecuador and going up South Central America and then going to the border of Mexico, and the Mexican government really treating them. There's videos that I've seen of Mexican police being extremely racist to Blacks. And so I don't think that racism is just something that it's like a natural born thing that only white people can have. I think it's something that everyone can feel. Yeah.
I mean, I guess the part that I would say, because yes, I do believe that institutional racism exists. And that's not just about sentiment in my head or Kenny's head or Jake's head or Eduardo's head or Rob's head. Institutional racism is a structure that allows capitalism to essentially, or the capitalists to rule. And some of the evidence for me that institutional racism exists is like the fact that we have the largest prison population on the planet of any nation, and most of those people are Black or brown. Some of those things that allow me to really know that it's alive and well is the fact that we have been in Afghanistan and Iraq for almost 2 decades now, and basically we've been able to do that largely on the basis of demonizing an entire population, saying these people are subhuman, not able to run their own countries, a white man's burden, right? And it's that kind of sentiment. And of course, there's the continuation of sexism as well, which is endemic, where basically for quite some time in the history of this country, women have been raising children unpaid labor, completely unpaid, and it continues to be unpaid, whether that be done by a woman or a man, but generally it's been historically a woman. So I believe that there's institutional sexism and institutional racism that exists, because I do believe that the understanding of the wealth differences between people and the situation people find themselves in isn't a result of something wrong with a given race or a given gender, but is a result of a system. And there's a quote from Frederick Douglass when he was trying to describe slavery that I think really describes capitalism, because he was trying to understand how is it that slave owners who were a minority in the South, where they had 4 million Blacks overall, and 80% of the whites that were poor didn't even own slaves. He's trying to explain, like, how is it they're able to rule without essentially a civil war displacing them, being what has to displace them. He says this, he goes, the hostility between whites and Blacks of the South is easily explained. It has its root and sap in the relation of slavery and was incited on both sides by the cunning of the slave masters. those masters secure their ascendancy over both the poor whites and the blacks by putting enmity between them. They divide both to conquer each. And that really fundamentally describes how capitalists have gotten over. And they do need to hide it. And they hide it using identity politics. They hide it by having a black general who's going to be responsible for bombing more brown people in the Middle East. They hide it by putting a woman in power who's going to be overseeing the separation of wealth between the rich and poor. This woman, Janet Yellen, right? She's going to be overseeing that now, all right? Where more women are going to be suffering under that separation as it goes on, all right? And the lives of families are going to become much worse. So I would say that that's how I understand racism and sexism as it exists. It's an attempt to divide both and divide us all to conquer each. It's an old trick of British imperialism and U.S. imperialism, but it also has an internal function to it. And one of the reasons they've been able to get away with immiserating whites is using racism to basically push down the conditions of brown people, and then use the wages of those brown people to put them against the whites who are already on the margins. So, and that's what they're going to do. And for us to think that it's immigrants coming in that's the problem, and not the capitalist who's exploiting us both, that's the trick that they get away with every time. And as long as we fall for that trick, we're going to continue to see all of us as workers fall behind. So racism, in my mind, is systemic. It's necessary for the functioning of capitalism. It's necessary for a minority to rule a majority. We know that in empires. We knew that under slavery. And it's true in this system. This system is just much better and more clever at hiding it, using identity politics as one of the ways it does that.
Well, I think we definitely set the table for another discussion on the entire economic and geopolitical and government system of socialism and capitalism, and how diametrically opposed they might be. But at the same time, and I think we'll root that out in the next conversation is, like Jake has been referencing through this conversation is, well, if the root of all evil is capitalism and the system itself is broken and suppresses, then where is the utopia going to come from? I mean, if you read, most of us have probably read Orwell at some point, especially Animal Farm. The pigs figure out that they're a little smarter than the rest and they want to have a little more than everybody else. So they start to set their own new set of rules at the top of the hierarchy. And the new hierarchy is created, but it's okay because we're now thinking in a different light. We're more engaged amongst ourselves as a group, but we're feeling better, but we're still under another ruler. So it'll be a great conversation to have when we build on the socialism, capitalism debate, and more of a conversation about that in another episode in the future.
And Jake, do you have any thoughts you want to summarize? Because I know we had our moments here.
I'm sorry, to me?
Do you have any thoughts you want to give to kind of take us out here? Because Eduardo will finish up, but I appreciate Rob kind of framing this discussion today, but also maybe our future discussion. So I want to hear from you now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I agree with Rob, and obviously I'm eager to get to that discussion because I think that's really the root of it. Because I think we understand, like, we have these very different views of the solution to our problems, right? And so how do we achieve that? Like, that's really what we need to figure out. And so, yeah, to understand like how that's actually going to work, how it'll function, what that'll look like is something that's what I'm interested in, So definitely.
Can I just ask this? I'm not trying to ask this. I'm just curious what Rob and Jake, do you think our responses are different from what you would normally categorize as the liberal left?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, because the liberal left, as you guys have, all three of you have pointed out to us today, the liberal left is more about just keeping things moving in a certain box and vision and not necessarily deviating too far. We as a country, we elect a Republican, then we elect a Democrat. You see it cycle and cycle and cycle. But, when Andy referenced way early in the conversation about wages, and But if you look at how wages have moved, they really haven't moved. When you start to factor in other things such as inflation or monetary policies and how they can keep wages down. And now more people have entered the workforce, but yet wages continue to be suppressed. And it's not because there aren't enough jobs. There are plenty. It's just the system is not designed necessarily to like a macro shift in wages. We haven't seen that in this country in 30, 40 years. And will it happen? I don't know. But your answers, I think, are enlightening to a degree. I mean, as you see from the questions and the things that I come from and being in banking and banking's only been a part of my career, but the other part of my career has been debt securitizations and servicing of debts. So I look at it a lot more economic viewpoint and more like in the rigidity of business oriented. So when you start to tilt that Rubik's Cube on its side and you start to think of it in a different way, you could see the points you all three are making. And it definitely food for thought, and it makes you think in a different way. And I think that's what we're trying to get to, is to get people to just think, like, I know you see it this way, and I know you think the system's really working for you, but if you think of it the way we've seen it over the last, we've lived the same, I mean, Andy and I are basically the same age. You know, he's lived in a different viewpoint in the world than I have. It doesn't mean that either one is completely perfect, but it's like, wow, I haven't really seen it from that point of view. So I'm not necessarily going to agree 100%, but there's a lot in there that I can get into, especially when it gets to, you know, how much are you worth as an individual? How much are you going to get paid in wages? And who's going to give you the, you know, we're getting the crumbs. Like Andy said earlier, you know, it's not necessarily about income, because anyone can make more income, but really, are you getting what you should be worth, given your own skill sets, given the job that you've put yourself out there to do? You're really getting just the crumbs. You're not really getting a piece of the pie. And the pie's finite, and they're not going to let you at the table to cut your own slice. Sometimes you got to go get it. And I think that, you know, I don't think the answers we all gave it was definitely divergent from the talking heads. And it was refreshing to be able to hear it in a different context. And definitely give me some understanding of the perspective. But Biden and company, they're not moving the needle. You know, they may seem to be with these, you know, executive orders and all this other crap, but in the end of the day, if you listen to some of his executive orders, he has a lot of hoods and shoulds and coulds and woulds. He doesn't have a lot of definitive, because he knows he can't stroke it because there's the 10th Amendment sitting out there. He can't make all the changes that he wants. But, you know, he's going to try. But, you know, we're getting basically Obama 3.0. We're not really getting a new vision for the country. We're getting the old vision kind of wrapped up in a new package. We'll see where it goes. But again, even if the next president, even if it's 8 years from now or 4, they're going to keep doing the same box. And how much longer can our people in this country start to realize and wake up? I'll give you a last example before, I don't want to keep rambling on, but Kamala Harris was out there. She did an interview in West Virginia. Joe Manchin had no knowledge, the big senator from West Virginia, no knowledge that she was going to be in the state, let alone give a live interview. She gives an interview talking about coal jobs going away and the next green job and what jobs can they get to go get. She had the absolute audacity to give the position that people can go out and find landmines in the state of West Virginia as a replacement job for the coal job that they're leaving. And that coal job, if you don't know anything about coal mining, pays a ton of money because it's dangerous. And, you know, she's saying, well, they can just become mine sweepers. Like, there's so many landmines in the state of West Virginia to go get. But just the absolute stupidity that they actually believe that left, I mean, the left that we're talking about, this organizational left, and they sit and go, oh, you can now go become this. Like, overnight, just snap the fingers, you're going to be looking for landmines and making as much money. they literally believe we're that dumb in the flyover states or in the rest of the country. They think we are collectively that dumb, that this is going to be, they'll be fine. As coal miners lose their jobs, they'll just find another. It's not going to work that way. And eventually, 50 years from now, maybe 20 years from now, 10 years, I think enough of us will start to get together and red pill ourselves to see kind of the things you're seeing as people from the left. But also, I think people from the right start to say, wait a second, that sounds kind of right. That sounds like we're all getting there. If we can all come together, that's the biggest danger to the system, is all coming together and saying, wait a second, we've all been red pilled. We see the horror that you've done.
Yeah.
If we get united, we can do something about it. But if we keep saying, like Andy said, and Kenny and Wardo, if we keep buying into the bullshit of the system and like pitting one side against the other and saying, well, that's the only way they can control us all. But if we can ever get it together and say, wait a second, this is all not the way to do it, they're going to be in for a world of hurt.
Yeah, if I could interject, I agree with you, Andy, when you were talking about how we are pitted against each other, because that obviously doesn't serve the interest who's in power. And I think that in general, most of us and all of us, on this video here, I think we actually agree on a lot of stuff. We just have different ways to get to the solutions, but I genuinely think that we can work those things out. Like, we can talk through those things,
Yep.
And so I think that's the goal here. And I think that in a sense, we all do agree, even though there are still great differences between the two mainstream parties, they really are one party in the sense that there are certain interests that they absolutely always agree on, right? Like, they disagree about certain things, but there's some standard things that they know this is how it is, and that maintains their power. So I think we all agree with that, So yeah, I think that we need to do our best to parse these things out and talk about the solutions, and I think we will find that we have much more that we agree upon.
I don't know if I want to be talking with you raving radicals.
I really appreciate this conversation. I think, this is part of the solution, to be able to talk, because by and large, like, we understand the mainstream, debate is just, pointing fingers. And, at least from my standpoint, I understand my views are not very mainstream. And we actually, I think Libsyn and I, Eduardo, we find ourselves very isolated within the left. This is not very popular. And so we are swimming against the stream over here. But again, to me, like, this is encouraging. Like you said, Jake, there's a lot of things that we have in common. Like, a lot of people think I'm a right winger because I'm pro guns, like for the workers and, and people to protect themselves and, against tyranny, right? Like, that was the intention of, having guns. But in many things, I'm against taxation on people, like especially poor people. That's not a solution. All these things, but I mean, overall, I guess. Thank you for the conversation. I'm really gonna go home and be encouraged by this, because I'm hoping to have more of this, not just with you too, but with other people, because I think I'm lucky to have lived abroad, because funny enough, I happen to think most of the world is conservative. I think the liberal ideology is very small. I lived in Nicaragua, a socialist revolutionary country, and I recognize a lot of conservative arguments. I recognize a lot of conservative arguments from my family. And so shaming, people on moral values and these things is not going to advance the conversation. We have to use logic in rationalize things in economic terms. And that's where I lean on Marxism, like I mentioned before, because, I'm not a demagogue. I'm not going to protect, those experiments of the past. And we have to look at them but there are lessons to learn there too. I don't romanticize anybody, just like you, Jake. I question authority of any kind. I want my individuality. I don't want to submit to anybody.
Yeah.
that's part of me, you know. But I understand that the solutions are not individual. It's gonna become, you know, have to take all of us, or a lot of us, significant number of us.
I agree with that as well. I truly believe that we have to become enlightened as individuals, so that in order that we can collectively overcome the struggles that we have. That's what I believe.
Jake, thanks for sticking it out. I know we had our moment, but I appreciate you kind of getting through this with us.
Yeah, no, thanks everyone. No, and you too, Andy. I'm just, you know, actually it's what Kenny said, is like, we're just tired of the regular talking points, right? I'm like eager to get to the meat. So
hey, to build on what Kenny just said a little bit ago, Dave Chappelle said in his most recent one of his great specials, he said, the Second Amendment's only there if the first one doesn't work.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes, wherever you found this episode, or on our blog at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything that you have heard here, please check us out elsewhere, because we might be taken down one day here on YouTube. Share your favorite episode, rate, review, and subscribe to any of our 8 platforms on podcast, Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play, and on channels on Bitchute and LBRY, spelled LBRY, and Odysee, ODYSEE, or YouTube. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us to our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Andy Lipson and Kenny Cepeda. Thank you, Rob Doyle and Jake Schmidt.